Before we get into Halakut Tapalah, 127 general laws of prayer, we remember that under Muslim rulers, no one was allowed to lie against a Jew. And we can think of the way that this drawing that I'm not showing of the woman carrying the cat indicates the good deeds and the suggestions to her past. Like her, we need to be able to recite scripture and use it in our difficult times. Some rules of rituals may only be in the ritual, but very often they have implication in other rituals and still further aspects of life. And when it comes to human composed or derived laws, we understand that not everything is going to be, spelt out. Of course, if you're devout enough of a prosaic character, you can become a living word. Exodus 23:25 indicates that we should pray every day. And sages have indicated that this is an emotional prayer. And it helps to have a preparatory period. Where we step away from, the human flaws. And we should pray with humility. The best prayers are said in a building. Well, I would say the sacred precincts of some sort. Like if the temple mounts the place, the temple mounts the place. It doesn't matter which building you're praying in. But if the time comes, you pray where you're at. And during the 18 statements, which we've seen different versions earlier being shared, the eyes are looking downward. Now, for example, in the Islamic tradition, people talk about the eyes, either you look downward to the place that you prostrate or, other places in your ritual, right? Or you look at the person leading. Those are the only two things that you should be doing. And it's important that the prayer is the only thing you're doing. And some people would do things all over again, like we've seen in mentions of the Dean card and stuff like this on the Zoroastrian list. But, maybe you just, repeat the word again. So you don't need to just redo the prayers. Now, if you're practicing the prayer, that's kind of something different. And there's obligation upon women as well. But before we get into that, Baruch, Mabruk, Hashwim, so blessed, and who blesses the years as an example. So the blessings that one has, you definitely want to say the appropriate blessing. But in particular, the Amt, Witzib, the women say, there's a lot of talk about 10 or more 13-year-old or older males disregarding the number of females and stuff when it comes to the ritual rules. And women can say the blessings of the Torah, but a lot of traditions say that they shouldn't be heard publicly because that's supposed to entice or whatever. So you notice where some of the extremisms have come from in the Islamic world is copied over from Judaism. And it helps to, take a little break sometimes before you pray after eating and drinking. Now, if you break fast and then do your evening rituals, just break fast lightly and, eat more when it's over. And it's important to clean one's prayer place. I mean, this room here is the place on the property that I clean the most. I sometimes sweep it multiple times a day, depending on who's in and out of here. And there's also places that even if there's, that it appears clean, it shouldn't be the place. Like, the place where people defecate and urinate. You avoid the places where the animals are doing that. The non-human animals. You don't block the roads and other stuff like this, but we're not seeing that. All that listed here is just, So yeah, places where there's traces of those impurities you don't want to pray in. And again, if there's a choice, you do not pray around immodestly clad women. And that could include in your own home, you kind of step away from your spouse or whatever. If it's okay in the house, but it's not okay outside, you should probably be somewhere where you're not seeing that. And you don't pray. You don't step aside and pray in a way that you're going to be observed. Like these fake yoga people, and they probably think it's real yoga, where they wear really skimpy clothing and bend over in front of huge windows and stuff like this. And it's like, if you were really doing yoga, you wouldn't need this big window for people to go by and watch. And then they'll complain if, you see somebody get yelled at because they stood watching the people or something. And it's like, they wanted to be seen. That was the whole point. They claim it's for sunlight. It's not for sunlight. And if you feel like you're going to have to go to the bathroom, you need to take care of that first. And if you can, you wash your hands before praying. The Quran mentions a dry ablution. So, if you don't have good water to, wet your hands and wipe over your arms and head and feet, you should probably tap the earth, tap clean earth or clean wall, and and so if there's charity to give, it's good to give it on the way. That's why a lot of places of worship have a donation box up front, right? And so we have the times of the prayer. By the morning prayer, actually things start at dawn, and there's a pause with the sunrise, and then there's a little bit of a continuing. But they tend, in Jewish tradition, it tends to be delayed past the first third of the twilight appearing again. So only enough to do some of the rituals and some of the prayer services, and then take the break and finish. A lot of congregations don't do a dawn prayer. They wait till the latter half of the morning or mid-morning or something like that. And it's important to consider the exact times of the prayers. And some people say that the Shema portion is not to be said until a person can recognize people without lights. Of course, this is not a Torah ruling. This is a priestly ruling. I will bring up the verses when we have that. And so at the end of the day, there's a saying. And at the end of the first watch of the day, so there's indication that it's not just a mid-morning prayer or something, although you can say things as you go about, oh, you take your mid-morning break. There's indication of a early afternoon and a late afternoon prayer in some references, but typically you just have the early afternoon where you take your break when the sun's at the highest. And if you suspect that the congregation isn't going to be able to say the main part of the prayer at its right time, then you should say it by itself. And the Shach-ares shouldn't be something said alone once the third of the day is gone. Of course, I would generally say if you miss the time and then you realize the time or you wake up or something like that, then you should keep it up, but that's not the general ruling in Judaism. And there are different opinions on how to calculate the different watches once you get into the day. And one is dividing from dawn to dark, or maybe sunrise to sunset, instead of dawn to dusk, which would be about 3 hours longer on average. And the middle of the day can be determined exactly. And some people just focus on the sunrise and sunset when determining these things. The mincha is the afternoon prayer. Oh, Shach-ares, of course, would be the earlier prayer. So the reciting of it relates to Elijah on Mount Carmel. So that's one's particularly careful about it. In Islam, they say to watch the middle prayer, whether that means the dawn prayer is the third prayer, the middle of the day prayer, or the middle of the afternoon prayer, or the inner prayer. You know, it can all be, teachings like this can all be looked at that way. And about half an hour after the middle point of the day, so the noon hour, the middle 12th of the day is finished. That's also the range of the Islamic prayer in the early afternoon is 5 minutes into it has to be something visually different, that it's not the highest point of the day, and enough so about 5 minutes into the afternoon to, again, an hour that's the middle of the day is over with. So on average, that's just half an hour, but we can look at that as far as the divisions. And as far as the night coming around, you have, you got reference to, some people don't think the night counts until you see 3 stars. And particularly with cities, like, well, we're supposed to wait till almost dusk. It's like, no, nothing about. Okay, so the 2 parts of the afternoon, Muncha Gadla and Muncha Qatna. So the greater and the smaller. So the late afternoon prayer would be a little bit after the midpoint of the afternoon. And now, if you recited at any time during these times, you've discharged your duty. But it's best to pray in the earlier portion. Of course, when we're talking about praying in a building, maybe the congregation is meeting at this time, so it just depends on when the congregation meets. And sometimes the congregation does its best, and they don't know about this other guy's opinion, and that opinion tends to be, it's right or something. But it's important that prayers are in different parts. And some people say that you wait 72 minutes after sundown, which again is almost, it's in the last third of the twilight period. And by twilight, I'm not counting the little streaks of the false dusk or the false dawn. And there's the general opinion that if it's going to be too difficult to assemble enough of a congregation later on, there can be the combining of prayers. In the Islamic tradition, this is only done with, actually being sick or on a journey or something like that. Then a person can combine, but it's not done because just, a convenience thing. Let's just pray 2 prayers now. And so the people who have that opinion, again, probably follow the Jewish opinion. And some prayers are, again, best said after dark. And if people aren't learned, some extent of praying is excused, but people should become learned to be able to do a minimal amount on their own, or be able to read from a book and, pray in the book. Honestly, for a couple, as I mentioned on my channel, I prayed for months with the book before I could even do, the basic on my own, and there's still much more to learn. And who knows, I could become a Dedic or something at some point. But the number 5 is important when it comes to the different blessings. And so the minyan is the 10 or more 13-year-old or older males. And if you can, they say to pray all the prayers in the synagogue. And if you arrive after people have started. You can omit, but there is the saying things on your own a little bit afterwards. So if you see somebody in a prayer service that's lingering on, let them finish their thing. And there's different portions if you want to give preference to what is said and what is not said. There's the Hallelujah, Halu at Hay Man Hashmim. There's the Hallelujah, Halu al Bakdashi. There's the Hallelujah, the other three psalms like that. There's the Leshem Tapartik, and starting with the Weberk, Dweed, and then there's the Hoodoo, Wahwa, Rchum, and there's the Mizmer, Latuda, and then there's the end of the Basuki, Dezimra. And if it's a sunset of Friday to a sunset of Saturday, the Psalms are given preference. And one shouldn't rely on emergency provisions for the prayers. But the proper order, it's important to say things in the proper order. So you can say things with the congregation instead of going over things really quickly by yourself and trying to, take care of things that way. And there are some ways to respond in the prayer. And it's important not to ever interrupt unless there, is a sufficient reason. And with the exception of the 18, the prayer may be interrupted for certain responses, as we've listed here, that some things are said by the congregation, some things are said by them both at the same time. Sometimes the congregation starts and then the reader, sometimes the reader starts and then the congregation. And for an aliyah, you can say things quietly. But don't instruct the Gabai about the Mi Shabruk. And if you didn't recite the Shema, again, you can say the Shema by yourself if it means that you're going to say it on time. Just like in the Islamic tradition, one can join a prayer, raise your hands, fold your arms, say the Fatiha before the bow, and you've got that bow. But if you did not follow the person leading in whatever part of the prayer, whether you knew it or not, that bow doesn't, it's insufficient. So you have to rise up and do another of that part. So it's similar thing. And as far as your own personal blessings, again, if you're pressed for time, that's the part to skip. As I've gone over in the last program, there's verses that pertain to people's names. And if the interruptions themselves are causing the emergencies, or if the interruption is the emergency, you say the Baruch Atah Yahweh. And the final one, or you can do things in between the interruptions. And some things, there's no room for any interruption. The part needs to be said again if it's interrupted. And it's important to know what the intervals are with the Saturis and Marib. And some people will recite Amen at certain points. And some people recite it after the person who does the reading, some people at the same time, and some people do this silently. And it's sometimes important to kind of get a feel or a knowledge of your congregation, whether or not this is going to be, whether one or the other is the opinion, and it's generally not worth causing the conflict. Like in the Islamic world, you have narrations about praying all the prayers out loud, the recitation of the first two bow sets. But for the most part, those who know that don't pray that way, because there's, the Sunnis don't want people to pray that way, and people figure it's better to pray in congregation than to have the conflict. And you can respond with Amen to all the benedictions in this Jewish prayer service. And there's a fourth level of the Saturich and Mariv, in which the Shema and the benedictions are sort of categorized in a way other than, we know how many of these things there are. But as far as the scriptural command about these things, you have the indication that the Shema is said in the dawn prayer and the dusk prayer. So any further saying of it is, traditional or extra or whatever. And sometimes if you're, you hear the benedictions and all that, and there's responses, you really shouldn't go back and do the responses to the prayers that you thought would be said. And a fifth level of things is that when it comes to the prayer of 18, there's no interruption. The reader, the people stop and listen to the person reading. And silently, there's the thinking as if you had responded out loud. They call it the silent mantra and that sort of stuff in other traditions. Oh, I don't know what the word for silent is, but you know what I mean. And some things, it's good to go through, like the usual 3 steps backwards and before. Don't artificially draw things out, but the muttering things really quick, we don't really see the thing about this. But there is a restriction of how much responses you can have. And most of these rules are Oberacos 12b talks about the commemorating the Exodus twice a day. You can pray twice a day, but you don't have to congregate mention the Exodus. But of course, as I said, there's the rabbinical tradition that's part of it, right? And so you should really, really focus on what you're saying. And that if you fulfill the obligations of those terms, like people talk about their love of God and they don't even try to keep the commandments, you need to focus on the explicit and implicit implications of what you're going over. And the right hand is the one that covers the eyes when you are reciting. Some people do this with every first verse when you're going over something. And a rule is that you say it so you can hear it. But if you go through the words, now you should learn how to move your mouth and say the words of prayers and stuff like this without it being, heard, any more than you would breathe. Because like when you're standing next to people or sitting next to people and you're trying to pray and they know you're trying to pray and you can hear their sharp whispers and stuff like this, it's like, just,